Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Hot Topics in Real Estate. I'm Rob Wachter with the Wachter Group in Jay Park, Carolina Living, and we are here today to talk about estate planning and your family home. And I have a terrific guest that I'm going to introduce in a second. But as always, if you're watching this and you have a question during the broadcast, just type it in the chat. We will find that and we will get your question answered. And if you're watching this on the recording or on our YouTube channel, just the same thing. You can go ahead and put a comment right under the video and we will make sure we get back to you with that answer. So today's guest is Louise Paglen of the McIntosh law firm in Davidson, North Carolina. And I'm excited to have Louise joining us because she's got some terrific credentials. Louise is an estate planning and elder law attorney, also focusing on special needs. She helps families protect their assets and their loved ones by planning for disability, death, things like that with trusts, wills, powers of attorney documents, guardianships, and even long-term care planning. She's an active participant with the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, with Wealth Counsel, Elder Law Answers, and Special Needs Answers. She's also a member of the Elder Law and Estate Planning sections of the North Carolina Bar Association. And Louise earned her degree from UNC Chapel Hill and her master's in risk management and insurance from Florida State University. Louise, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Rob.
Well, estate planning is a topic that we hear a lot about, or you see a lot about advertising and TV, but typically a lot of folks tend to think that estate planning is for the wealthy or estate planning is for the elderly. I'd like to talk to you today about exactly who estate planning is really for, and particularly how important it is to address the family home and real estate in that estate planning. So tell me a little bit about estate planning and who you work with and what that process looks like.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Estate planning is for everyone. It's for all adults. We actually recommend anyone over 18 have a basic estate plan in place. But we don't really do estate planning for ourselves. We really do it for the people that we love most, our family members, our friends, and sometimes even our pets, because we are planning so that if something happens to us, the people that care about us the most, that are going to be charged with making decisions for us if we become incapacitated and we aren't able to make decisions for ourselves, or if we die, that it's easier for them at a very difficult time in their lives. So estate planning really isn't about us, it's about the people that we care about. That's why we do it.
That makes sense.
My process is to always start with an initial consultation, because I don't like a one-size-fits-all approach to estate planning. It's really important for me to talk to people about their family members. Who do they trust? What concerns do they have? So I always require an initial consultation before I'll work with anybody, regardless of what type of estate planning we're doing, whether they're very wealthy or they're middle class or they're a college student who needs to have a power of attorney in place in case something happens to them.
And I would imagine it brings up a lot of questions for folks. You mentioned the question, who do you trust? That can be a difficult question for us sometimes, right?
It can be a difficult question. So when I'm working on a power of attorney document, which gives someone the authority to do anything legally or financially that you might be able to do for yourself, I will literally ask the client, do you trust this person with all of your money in your life? Because that's the kind of responsibility and power that you're giving them. And that's the best risk management that they can do, is make sure that they just choose somebody that they trust. It doesn't even always have to be a family member if they have concerns about whether that person can manage things.
And I would imagine the person that they trust might not always be the person who they want to have the benefit of their estate.
No, not necessarily the case. If they have minor children, they might get the benefit of their estate, but they're certainly not going to identify those people as being responsible for managing their finances if they're not able to, or after they pass. Or they might be better off with a professional managing things for them, because maybe they have children that have special needs, or a child that has problems. Sometimes people have all kinds of problems. We know that we're all there's nothing to be embarrassed about when people talk to me about their family members, because I've heard it all and seen it all. And some people have problems with money, other people have problems with alcohol. There might be someone who has a problem with dementia, and we can't be asking those people to take positions of responsibility.
Of course. As we're talking about responsibility and someone's assets, of course, their home, and of course I'm in real estate, so that's why we're here, is to talk about specifically the family home and the unique challenges that might come with that. Because a lot of times people just think, well, it's the house, it'll just be there for the kids or for my spouse or the family. Let's talk a little bit about what unique things come up with the family home, or why it's so important to address that for homeowners.
Well, the home is so important for lots of reasons. One being, for many people, it's their most valuable asset. So to make assumptions about what's going to happen when you die, or if you become incapacitated, your assumptions may very well not be accurate. For example, I was working with a couple who were in a second marriage, and they had a property, a second home property, a vacation home, that the wife told me she wanted to go to her children, because it was a second marriage, what we call a blended family. And so we pulled the deed, which is in the public record, and I looked at it and I said, well, if you die first, this home is going to your husband. And then when he dies, it will pass according to his estate plan, if he has an estate plan. And she said, well, that's not what I want. And I said, well, I understand that's not what you want, but that's what the law will provide unless we make some changes. And that was the result of really the client going to the attorney and saying, I simply want a deed, without really having a deeper conversation about what the legal consequences of the document that was drafted, what were the legal consequences of that document. So the other thing that can happen is in blended families, your children could be disinherited accidentally, because if you own a home with your spouse and you have it titled as a married couple, as in this case, it just goes to the spouse. It doesn't matter that you put in your will that you want it to go to your children, because by operation of law, if the deed was drafted a certain way, it was going to go to the spouse and not to the children. So there's a lot of different tools that we can use. We can use trusts, we can use life estate deeds, we can use lots of different tools. But what's really important is that when I work with somebody, is that I know what their intentions are, and we have to have a conversation, a good long conversation to flesh that out.
So what I'm hearing you say is that there may be a significant difference between having an attorney process a document and having an attorney involved in doing planning.
Absolutely. And that's why people need to be very selective about the professionals that they work with, and make sure that they do their research and they're working with somebody that's going to have that conversation with them, and make sure that their wishes are going to be carried out. Otherwise, you're paying for a service that really isn't going to give you what you want at the end. So that's during our initial conversation, we have a lot of conversations about how assets such as the home can pass outside of probate. A lot of people want to avoid probate. Well, if you're a married couple, you may avoid probate at the death of the first of you, because the house immediately goes to the spouse. But then when that surviving spouse dies, it's going to be administered according to their estate. And depending upon your circumstances, that could put it could mean that if you have, well, there's just all kinds of scenarios that could happen. Like I already gave you an example with the blended family.
Sure. Well, it sounds very similar to, frankly, real estate, where you can have a company list your house, on the public record for sale. But if there's not a professional there giving you advice on how and why and when and the best way to do it, it can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. It's
always more expensive to have to go to court when you have a problem. A lot of estate planning is about, a lot of legal services is about avoiding going to court. People might think that lawyers spend a lot of time in court, but many of us are actually trying to protect our clients from having to go to court. And so it's really important that your intentions be clear in the documents, and that the legal documents actually do what you intend them to do at your death, or if you become incapacitated. So it's so important that there be people that can also manage your home if you develop dementia and are unable to manage it yourself, or you need long-term care, you need to have the documents in place that would allow somebody else to take care of turning off the cable bill if that's what needs to be done.
Mhm. No, and it sounds to me like in today's DIY world, people try to, say, I can do this myself, right? I'll just write something up that says what I want it to happen. We'll have it notarized, and that should be what happens, right? But is there ever a time where that might not even jibe with what the law allows or requires?
Well, ask anyone that has done, any attorney that's done any kind of estate litigation. I had an estate litigation case where gentleman wrote a handwritten will and told his family members what he wanted to happen at his death. And I had to explain to the clients that it doesn't matter what your loved one told you they wanted to happen. That doesn't really have any legal relevance. The only thing that has any legal relevance is this handwritten document that he created on the way to the hospital. And that was not very clear. It was very ambiguous. So when documents are ambiguous or unclear or not properly drafted, and there's disputes amongst family members, then the only way to resolve those disputes are by going to court. And if you have to go to court, not only is it going to be expensive, it's going to be emotionally draining, and it's going to be unpredictable because someone else is going to be making the decision for you. And if you have to compromise, you're usually going to have both sides unhappy. Ask anybody who's been through a divorce and has to go to court.
So what I'm hearing you say is two different judges on two different days could read the same family documents and come to different conclusions?
Well, especially because that document is subject to interpretation. So now you do have the human factor in there. I mean, we have cases and statutes that we can rely on to help us interpret, but if you're trying to figure out what someone who's no longer with us meant by what they wrote into that document, it's just a big mess. And I like to say we're all going to die one day, but we don't need to leave a mess when we do.
Well put. Well put. So as I think my area of practice specializes in working with seniors, people that are 55 and up, and working with them. They have a lot of questions sometimes about Medicare and Medicaid and planning for the house and how that might affect their heirs or themselves. Can you talk a little about some of the things to be cautious of or to know about?
We get that question a lot. People worry that the nursing home is going to take their house, or the government's going to take their house, and or do-it-yourselfers. They start giving assets away, which is always a bad idea when you're concerned about long-term care. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people making in that do-it-yourself area, or let me see if I can get a cheap, quick claim deed. I want to give this house. I want to give my house to my daughter.
Like
and
legalblank.com.
It's going to be protected. And then they need nursing home care. And if they gave that house away within a 5-year period before they apply for Medicaid to pay for the nursing home, now they're going to have a problem with Medicaid putting a penalty period on that time where they can't qualify for Medicaid. So that creates a big problem. And the other problem it creates is that you're actually trying to do something wonderful for your daughter and save the most valuable asset that you probably have for your daughter. And you're actually creating a scenario that when your daughter goes to sell that house, even if you don't have a Medicaid problem, she's going to have to probably pay capital gains taxes because she didn't inherit it. So there's a lot of disadvantages to giving property away unless it is given in certain types of trusts, which we just don't have the time to get into the details about that because it just gets too complicated, which is why you need a lawyer to help you with it. Which reminds me, a lot of times people will say to me, this is really complicated. And I like to say, yes, if it wasn't complicated, you wouldn't need me to help you with it. You'd be able to do it yourself. So it is complicated. And Medicaid planning is extremely complicated. And there aren't a lot of lawyers that do it for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know one of the other things that you alluded to earlier that can be complicated, I would imagine, is for families with children with disabilities, where the family has to prepare for their care, not just their financials. Are there
Yeah,
special issues with that?
there's a lot of tricky issues with that, and I've seen this more than more often. It's always unfortunate when you see a situation that could have been taken care of with a good estate plan and it wasn't taken care of. Sometimes parents, very well-meaning parents, are taking care of their children at home, living in the home with them, and then upon their death, that special needs child might now, that no longer a child, an adult, that person who's receiving disability benefits, if they're receiving Medicaid or Social Security income, which are income and asset-based programs, they can inherit they might inherit just a portion of the house if they have siblings, if there was no estate planning done. So suddenly now their siblings want to sell the house and they're going to get a share of the proceeds. So say the house was worth $300,000 and there's 3 children, and now this person who's receiving Social Security income and Medicaid inherits $100,000. They have no place to live. They can't afford to buy a place with $100,000, and they're also going to lose their public benefits, that because now they have too much money to qualify for those benefits. And so with some planning, things could be done so that that person on disability could maybe have an occupancy right in the house, to be able to live in the house until they pass away. Or if the house is sold, at least their portion could be held in a special needs trust so that their benefits aren't at risk, and they could still maybe take advantage of moving into a subsidized rental situation. Or the funds could be used to buy a house for their benefit, but that money would be protected so that at their death, it could go to other relatives. So yeah, that is one of the things that people, if they have anybody, member of their family who's on disability, they really need to talk to an attorney that understands these issues to make sure that their inheritance is protected.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for clearing that up. In dealing with a lot of seniors, I also get a lot of questions often about reverse mortgages and how they factor into the estate plan, whether they're good or they're bad, or, what in your experience, what planning challenges does having a reverse mortgage provide or create, or doesn't it?
Well, for some people, a reverse mortgage is a lifesaver. It allows them to stay in their home and take the equity out of the home without having to pay it back. They might not be eligible for a home equity loan because they don't have sufficient income to pay back a mortgage or a home equity loan. And so the reverse mortgage might be the only way that they can afford to stay home and pay for the home care that they need. Now, what happens with a reverse mortgage, though, is once that person moves out, if they need to move into an assisted living facility or they need to move into a nursing home, now the mortgage is going to be called in, and the mortgage company has a requirement that you live in the home as long as you're not having to pay that mortgage back. And once you vacate those premises, whether by death or because you move into another residence, now the mortgage becomes due, and usually the house has to be sold to pay the mortgage. Some of the planning that we do for Medicaid planning, we can protect the ability of the family to take a mortgage against a home and also still qualify for long-term Medicaid without having to vacate the premises or be able to rent the house. So we take all of these things into consideration and try to make the recommendations that are best for that individual client. And sometimes, depending upon their circumstances, a reverse mortgage is the best option for them. Sometimes it's the worst option, but it's not just a black or white, like reverse mortgages are good or reverse mortgages are bad.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that specifics on that, because I get that question a lot. And I've always said that the product itself is neither good nor bad. It's how it fits within your individual plan, which is why it's important, if you're considering using a reverse mortgage, even if you're not considering selling the house, talking to a real estate professional and an estate planning professional can be really crucial in making sure that what you're doing is in your own best interest.
Exactly.
Great. Well, I really appreciate the time you've given me tonight. I think we've covered the things that we wanted to cover. Let me look real quick in the chat to see if we have had any questions, and it does not look like we have had any questions. But if you're watching this on the recording, again, as I mentioned before, just put questions in the comments under the video, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube, and we will get those answers back to you. And Louise, I really appreciate your time, your expertise, and you coming on my show to share this information today.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate you inviting me.
All right. Well, look forward to seeing all our viewers on our next installment of Hot Topics in Real Estate. And again, this is Rob Wachter with the Wachter Group. If you have any questions about real estate in any different capacity, just reach out to me through Facebook or in the chat, and I'll be glad to get to you. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay.